Betty was a lonely young lady in her early 20s. She failed to study biology in school as she suddenly developed a passion, photography. As a result, she dropped out of college to chase after her passion immediately after the uncertain demise of her mother. She was in college just to make her mom happy by obtaining a degree. However, deep down, she felt her body slowly drifting towards a call for photography. However, things took a drastic turn, and as it looked like the world was turning against her, she became very broke and couldn't afford rent in the city. As a result, she seeks permission from her aunt Emily to stay at her house by the countryside for some months until she's able to gather some money to cater for her life.
Aunt Grace.
Hey. Oh, how old were you?
I don't know, maybe 12.
The house is mostly empty with no body staying in for days. Aunt Grace is having a tight time with her husband, Paul, who refuses to sell the house for some unknown reason.
Let me rent it out. You won't let me sell it.
Immediately after Betty arrives, she locks eyes with a young and charming landlord named Kevin, inviting a spark for a friendly union. Despite the fact that Paul disapproves of Betty's stay, he finally agrees only after giving a stern warning that Betty is out of bounds from his bedroom. Nobody, not even Aunt Grace, knew why her husband was so obsessed with this bedroom. As the two women sat down to talk, Grace apologizes for not finding out about the demise of Betty's mother, and hence not showing up for the funeral. Betty forgives her and tells them to reconnect with their new life. Also, Grace reveals to Betty that her marriage is near fail, and she plans to relocate to Africa, where she can get more pictures of nature. As Grace introduces Betty to Paul, he straightforward talks about how he disapproves of her stay and wouldn't entertain her going through her personal stuffs. Grace leaves the apartment and hands over the key to Betty as she makes her trip to Africa. Now Betty is left alone to cater for the apartment. As Paul makes his way out of the house, he locks eyes with their neighbor Kevin, as there seems to be tension growing between them. Later that night, whilst Betty stays on the couch in the hallway, she suddenly hears strange noises outside the apartment. Following her curiosity, she's more startled by objects moving in the dark, as she quickly rushes inside the apartment in fear. Inside, she fails to locate her phone, which she mistakenly left in Paul's room, whilst greeting him upon her arrival. Because of this, she calls her friend Emily, using the landline, and tells her about her safe arrival. The next day, she sets to explore the apartment and finds a radio and a garage full of Grace's collection of photographs. She finds an old camera and sets out into the woods to explore nature and the environment. During this, she finds out the phone, which she had mistakenly left in Paul's bedroom, had been crushed on the ground, as though it had been run by a semi-truck 10 times. Back in the garage, she's seriously engaged in printing her photographs when Kevin, the neighbor, startled her.
Hello? Hey.
Jesus! Dude, you scared me!
No, I'm sorry. I knocked and I said something and I just wanted to introduce myself.
So you just decided to walk right in?
No. Yeah, like not cool. I'll just leave you alone, okay?
Wait, I had my headphones on.
Right. That makes sense.
Hi, I'm Maddie.
She had on headphones and hardly heard him knocking the door. She apologized, and the two instantly bonded right after Kevin saw that Maddie had already started taking cool pictures of him. Kevin was passing by to look for his missing cat, who refused to come home last night. Later that night, as Maddie scuffled through the belongings of Grace, she heard a large crack outside, giving her a jump scare. However, after checking outside, she found no one. The whole experience in the building at night seemed very weird to her. Maddie was supposed to be the only person in the apartment, as Grace and Paul were mostly away. She would walk through the apartment wearing only her underwear. However, this morning, she was startled by Paul's appearance in the hall. He had an extra key and came into the apartment without her notice.
Paul! Can't you give me a heads up when you're coming over?
Why would I?
As she rushed into her room to change into some clothes, she came back to see an empty couch. However, she heard sobs coming from Paul's bedroom. As weird as it could be, Paul suddenly came out blaming Maddie for interfering in his business and turning up the thermostat. The next day, Maddie's friend Layla came from the city just to see Maddie. As the two friends talked over their experiences within the past few days, Maddie's disclosed to Layla that from the very first time she stepped foot in the apartment, she always felt weird at night, as though someone was watching her. She didn't understand why her aunt will still try to fight for her marriage with Paul. Then, Layla makes a weird suggestion. After enjoying some fast food, the two scuffle through Grace's belongings and open her private diary, reading most of her secrets aloud, including series of events recorded in the book describing how Grace felt seeing Paul and Kaycee around each other. Kaycee was a model who came to spend some days with the married couple to help Grace finish up with a project. Layla was so much interested in knowing more about Grace and Maddie, just sat there not stopping her.
That's enough.
You're lame.
Around 9 p.m., Paul held a heavy waste bag and climbed the septic tank, disposing some waste into it. Around that same time, Maddie was taking a cold bath in the bathtub when she suddenly felt a warm, gummy liquid dripping on her feet. To her horror, it was blood splattering everywhere. Grace had told her to call Paul whenever she needed help. However, when she did, Paul refused, claiming he will only be available the next morning. Right after the call, he smirked, revealing he had something to do with it. The next day after his arrival, he cleaned the tank and told Maddie it had been some animals trapped in the tank, as he saw fur all over the place. Again, he saw a tag with the name Jazzy on it, indicating the cat had been a victim of the animals trapped in the septic tank. Maddie decided to show it to Kevin, but gave up upon seeing how desperate the young man had been within the past few days. That night, Maddie received an unexpected guest. Kevin came around holding a wine and pizza, as he had already started feeling lonely. Maddie threw Jazzy's tag under the couch, not wanting to destroy the moment she will be having with Kevin by breaking the bad news to him. During their conversation, it was revealed that Maddie's dad ran off when she was just 2 years old, leaving her with her mother, who also unfortunately died some few years ago. Also, Kevin claims Paul had always been a good guy until the mysterious disappearance of Kaycee. Maddie lied about the disappearance of Jazzy and claimed Paul only found the fur of raccoons. It was at this moment that the two started admiring each other. Kevin suddenly saw the MP3 player Maddie had been carrying along and instantly withdrew his emotions. It looked as though it was reminding him of a past incident. He quickly said goodbye and made way towards his house, leaving Maddie alone. That same night, Paul visited the house at dawn and decided to suffocate Maddie to death with a pillow. However, he couldn't bring himself to commit such an unthinkable act, and he just abandoned the mission. The next day at home, while Maddie was enjoying some cereal for breakfast, she heard footsteps approaching in the direction of Paul's bedroom, and to her utmost surprise, sees the middle-aged man in no clothes, standing right in front of the doorway. Maddie really wanted to leave the apartment, but she was too broke to do so, and only ended up complaining to her friend. That same day, she mustered the strength to tell Kevin about the demise of her cat Jazzy, and explained all the incident to him. Paul kept sneaking into the house every now and then, to cause a nuisance to Maddie's life in the little apartment. This evening, he sneaked inside and destroyed the knob to the bathroom, leaving Maddie trapped inside after taking her bath. However, Kevin arrived at the same time and saved her from suffocating in the washroom. That same night, she pleaded with Kevin to sleep beside her, as she was afraid of everything happening around the house. The next morning, after the two woke up from sleep, they were met with a shocking sight. The whole house had been turned upside down and items scattered in the hall. Kevin finally concluded all this was the work of Paul trying to lure her out of the apartment. Maddie hardly believed him. She wasn't too sure why someone would trash his own apartment. She quickly set her camera on time-lapse with hopes of catching the thief or robber the next time. The two then clean up the mess in the room. The next night, Maddie's friend Layla comes along with Grace's diary she had slipped away on her last visit. She went through the diary whilst in her apartment and came to spill all the juice to Maddie. But come to think of it, which person would sell her own aunt out to her friend by giving her the permission to go through her private diary and expose all her secrets? During their scuffle in the rest of the items, Maddie found a picture of Kaycee and Kevin happily riding in a car and immediately concluded that the two used to date during her stay at Paul's house. Thus the reason for the tension always brewing up between Paul and Kevin anytime they meet. Whilst the two ladies did more research about Kaycee and her past life, Paul sneaked in at night, was eavesdropping on their conversation. He used the back door and went to his bedroom, lifting up the bed. Underneath laid the lifeless and preserved body of Kaycee, The model almost everyone thought had fled without saying goodbye. Apparently, Paul killed her in a misunderstanding and buried her under his bed, always performing rituals on her anytime he came to the apartment. He recalled how Kevin had swayed his way to make an impression on Kaycee and won his attention rather than him. It was for this reason that he hated Kevin and killed Kaycee on the day he found out she was moving in with Kevin. Kevin was standing on his balcony when he saw Paul going into his apartment. He quickly demounted from his stairs and threatened Paul to leave Maddie alone. He accused the middle-aged man for intentionally jolly his pet cat. However, before he could utter any other word, Paul swung a hammer from his back pocket and broke Kevin's skulls with a force leading to his demise. As Layla made way to her apartment, Paul closely followed with his car in an attempt to find her location. On further reading the diary, the two girls discovered a fact about Paul's mental instability, which nobody took serious, except for one doctor, who died 3 days after he diagnosed mental illness. Layla had barely stepped into the bathtub when she heard a knock at her door. Upon opening the door, she was surprised to find Paul, who had disguised himself as a plumber, entered her bathroom, killing her at the spot. The next day in the morning, Maddie, not knowing Kevin had died, went to his apartment to offer a coffee, but was met with only silence and thought Kevin was mad at her for the previous incidents. That night, after returning from a walk, she went through her photos and videos and found out Paul had been there all along, and also found out from footages that he had killed Kevin and placed him in his bedroom. His next action was to completely eliminate Maddie to keep her quiet. As she ran to start the car, she found the helpless body of Layla laying at the back seat of Paul's vehicle. This freaked her out and she began to run for her life, but only ended up on a bridge with a shovel in her hand. With this being her only weapon, she beat the hell out of Paul and left him unconscious, only calling 911 after making it to the house. However, she was attacked from her back by Paul, who had immediately gained consciousness and proceeded to strangle her to death. During the process, Maddie grabbed a hammer from his pocket and swung it into his skull, leaving him unconscious once again. Soon the cops arrived and saved her. Paul was sentenced to a lifetime in jail. 1 year later, Maddie opened her own art gallery with the faces of the deceased, Kaycee, Layla, and Paul being one of her top collections, which was not for sale. As Aunt Grace pulled her aside, she encouraged Maddie to give college a shot so she can make her mum happy. She heeded by this advice and applied for a degree in photography. Hello there. Thank you very much for watching. Please support the channel by liking and subscribing.